Welcome to Longevity Lifestyle Designers. This is Zach here with secretsoflongevity.com. This video is intended as obviously a video for my subscribers to learn about this topic, but also as a reference that I use to give to people who are asking me questions, because I do get a lot of questions about raw dairy or dairy in general and its effect on our health, and just what my thoughts are. Instead of continually writing those out for people, I'm just going to reference this video, and also you might be coming to this just by keyword searches on YouTube, in which case I hope you enjoy the information. So over the course of the video I'm going to discuss sort of a brief history of dairy consumption, why we need to be consuming raw dairy products, and specifically all of the factors that would make up the best type of raw dairy products to be consuming in terms of organic or not organic, what type of cow, what the cow's eating, etc. So all the factors that would make for the healthiest dairy products that would be okay for us to eat. And then I'm going to end the video by addressing all the concerns that vegans and in some cases vegetarians and basically animal rights activists have around the consumption of dairy, and sort of countering their main points that I'm aware of against why people shouldn't be consuming it. So to start off, dairy has been consumed in the record that we know of for about 30,000 years. We have evidence of being in actual vessels from 20,000 years ago, so there's very hard evidence for 20,000 years ago, but it extends as far back as 30,000 years, which is when farmers began herding cattle. There's evidence of that, and of obviously the consumption of the dairy. Now, dairy cattle are not a wild animal, so all mammals make milk, obviously, but the auroch, which was the animal that was eventually bred down to a more smaller animal known as a cow that only exists in a farming, herding type scenario, and this animal was created for the purpose of being more manageable in a livestock format, and obviously what came with that was also the consumption of its dairy. So scientists actually recognize something known as lactase persistence as the only genetic adaptation humans have had to a food that they weren't once used to consuming. So while 30,000 years does not sound like a great amount of time in terms of human evolution, if we look at the record of what humans were eating as hunter-gatherers before that, if we're talking exclusive hunter-gatherers with no sort of agricultural roots and no herding roots, they were just hunting and just gathering wild food, they obviously weren't consuming dairy. So that first step into agriculture, or modern agriculture, before they were even planting crops and developing things like wheat and other hybridized plants that don't exist in nature either, dairy was the first thing that was consumed outside of our normal diet. So dairy, like I said, is actually affected us because we've eaten it for so long that we've actually developed an ability to digest it very well. And this varied across various parts of the globe, but the majority of the world population has some degree of lactase persistence. So that is the persistence of the production of lactase, the enzyme needed to digest lactose that babies have to digest their mother's breast milk, lactose. They've had that enzyme production persist past the time of weaning, so past and on into adulthood. And so the common argument that, if we're past the age of drinking breast milk, we don't need to drink the breast milk of another animal. However, just the fact that we've done it for so long and we've developed this adaptation doesn't mean that we shouldn't do it. So the fact that we've evolved to basically handle lactase or lactose through the lactase enzyme is a strong indicator for the importance that animal products, and specifically dairy, has played in our diet. Now, it varies across the world. If you're from northern and western European countries, and also parts of Africa, more northern parts of Africa, throughout the Middle East, and certain other parts of the world, there was dairy consumed to such a high degree, also India and certain parts of Asia, so much dairy is consumed that there's a very high lactase persistence, whereas other parts of the world it's lower, depending on how much cattle raising they did in actually consuming of dairy, whether it was goat, sheep, camel, cow, and any other animals that were raised for dairy products, yak in the Himalayas. So because this happened in so many areas, there was lactase persistence in the majority of the world's population. However, there's certain areas of the world that didn't do it at all. Certain parts of Asia, certain parts of Africa, probably certain parts of the Philippines, and obviously North American Indians didn't have this either. So there's lactose intolerance, and that's true lactose intolerance in the sense that they don't produce lactase. However, raw milk contains lactase in it, and the amount of lactase is proportionate to the amount of lactose. So even if you don't have lactase persistence, you can technically consume milk or dairy products and still digest it if it's in its raw state. You're potentially going to have a little bit more trouble than someone with lactase persistence. However, if you also consider that you can ferment dairy products, and the vast majority of dairy was consumed fermented, whether it's cheese, clabber, yogurt, kefir, and any other form of fermented dairy product, there's probably some I'm forgetting, but these are bacteria that are naturally found in the milk, good, beneficial, healthy bacteria like acidophilus and other things. These consume the sugars and proliferate and cause a milk to go sour, but because it's a raw product, it's not going to have toxic byproducts like a sour pasteurized milk would have. But by consuming this, you've actually eliminated the majority, if not all, the lactose, and it's very easily digestible at that point by virtually everyone on the planet. There's very few people on the planet with a true milk allergy in the sense that they cannot digest certain proteins in the milk. This is like 1 in 1,000 or 1 in 10,000, very low odds in terms of the global population. So people nowadays who have lactose intolerance, which technically doesn't exist as a true issue, they're merely having problems with digesting lactose, depending on how advanced their lactase persistence is, depending on their genealogy and their heritage. Personally, I have very high lactase persistence because I'm from UK, Scotland, and Wales. That's my ancestry from both sides of my family. A lot of dairy consumption, so even pasteurized dairy I can digest pretty well, and I never really had major problems with it. But I obviously, from my personal experience, I much prefer raw dairy products because it's even more digestible up beyond what I could handle before. So with that being said, I'm going to get into the properties that you want to have in a raw dairy product if you're going to be consuming raw dairy. Now, I also have to mention that the legality of raw dairy varies across the US and different states. It also varies into other countries in the world. I'm not aware of the legalities in other countries. I know for a fact that it's illegal across all of Canada. However, it's not illegal to the sense of, a drug would be, thank gosh. But it is illegal to sell raw milk, so please don't message me asking for me to sell you raw milk because I'm not a farmer. I won't be able to sell this. But there's certain areas where there's loopholes that have been figured out, such as cow shares that exist in Canada, where you pay a sum to a farmer who's doing this kind of program, and then technically you own a part of the cow, but the farmer's just taking care of it, and then they're providing you with milk, and you're paying them for the service to take care of the cow, which is the price of the milk. So that's a way around it. You can either set that up if you are a farmer. There's certain people who've been in the spotlight, which I'm sure if you search Cowshare Ontario or Cowshare Canada, you're going to start getting names. You could find people you want to contact to learn more about this. But yeah, directly selling from the farmer to the consumer in Canada is illegal. In certain parts of the US I believe it is too. But if you're really keen about this, you're going to find a way around it. Trust me on that one. Because it is really our right to be able to do these things. It's our body, it's our choice, and we just need to be clear with the government that if we're advocating these things and standing up for it, that we need to have the right to do what we want with our own health. Specifically, even more so than certain substances some people might take. We're talking about a normal food that's been consumed for many thousands of years in this state of being raw and unpasteurized. So I'll get into the top things that you need to take into account when looking for a source for a dairy product that you're going to be consuming, and that this would entail what would make milk healthy. And when the more of these factors that aren't in alignment with what you're consuming, the less health promoting it's going to be and the more detrimental it would be. So the vast amount of fear and unhealthy attitudes towards dairy is largely based on the fact that most, in fact all of commercial dairy does not meet all of these requirements. So number one is that it's raw. So pasteurization is the heating of milk to destroy pathogens, and that, again, that preserves milk in the sense that it creates a longer shelf life for milk in that state. However, if you consider pasteurized milk versus raw milk and you set them both out, yes, the raw milk is going to go bad, but it's not bad in the sense that you can't drink it anymore. It's just not going to be milk any longer. It's going to turn into clabber, or it's going to turn into yogurt or kefir or whatever bacteria was in there that happened to ferment it. So it's still consumable and perfectly healthy, but it's not in a state of milk. Pasteurized milk, when you leave it out and goes sour, it can actually make you sick. But it actually stays in that sort of liquid, consumable form that tastes like milk for longer when it's sitting on the shelf in stores. So that's basically the difference between the two. But pasteurization came about because of Louis Pasteur. His intention was never to pasteurize milk, but it was a form of basically sanitizing whatever food product or whatever was being pasteurized, and it got adopted by the milk industry. So there's certain bad bacteria that can on occasion occur in milk, in dairy products in general, that yes, they need to be destroyed. Now, very conventionally raised dairy cows, we're just going to stick with discussing dairy milk, but this can, and all these properties do apply to all the other dairy products that are out there that one could talk about. So specifically, if we think of California and the factory farming that goes on in California, according to one study, 31% of all the milk, or all the cows that produce milk, will have some sort of pathogenic bacteria that is very harmful to human consumption, for humans to consume it. So this is prior to pasteurization, so they need to pasteurize factory farmed milk, and we'll get into why that is so unhealthy for the cows, and they allow this to happen, and why the body has these pathogens in it in later points. But just sticking with pasteurization, these cows, the 31% of them, which is basically a third of all cows that produce some negative bacteria in them, or they get it in them and it goes through and ends up in the milk, or it gets on into the milk through the udders, which have been exposed to fecal matter because they're in confinement lots and feed lots, which aren't grassy meadows that basically absorb and recycle manure. They're just like slabs of concrete that build up manure and it gets all over the cows. So naturally you can see that that would be a very unsanitary environment that would allow for negative bad bacteria to proliferate, both inside the cow, inside their udders, on the outside of the udders, and that can get into the milk. But it does get there, but they pasteurize it all, which is very high heat, which damages a number of aspects of the milk. So number one, like I already mentioned, it destroys lactase, which is needed to digest the lactose. Lactose is a sugar. Lactase is an enzyme that breaks the sugar down into basic energetic components for our body to use. So right off the bat, you've made milk in its whole state not easily consumable by a lot of people, and it really varies in degree, like I said, depending on your level of lactase persistence, but it's going to be less health promoting for these people because of this. In addition to the lactase enzyme, there's also a whole host of other enzymes which are destroyed and made unusable by the body, such as lipase, phosphatase, and phosphatase is actually needed to absorb the minerals from dairy, and so when you have store-bought milk, it's not doing much at all for your bones because you're just having calcium running through your system, gumming up your system, and some of the other minerals that are in milk, and they're made unabsorbable. And you also need the milk fat to absorb the minerals, and a lot of mainstream milk is homogenized, cut into skim milk, into 1% milk, 2% milk, basically not whole milk. And this is further going to limit the ability for your body to absorb the minerals from milk and actually make strong, sturdy bone structure, strong, sturdy teeth, and actually use the minerals for all the other tissues in your body. And again, the lipase enzyme helps digest the fat in the milk, and obviously all the enzymes that are in milk are needed to digest certain portions of it, or at least they help digest it. So if those are destroyed, your body has to work itself to digest those components of the milk. It has to contribute its own enzymes, which ages us, is a burden to our system, makes us tired and sluggish, and in some cases we don't even have the enzymes to do those things, which just further makes it more difficult to digest and utilize. The next thing destroyed by pasteurization with high heats is obviously the bacteria. Now, a very healthy cow is going to only produce healthy bacteria inside of it. It's going to have certain ways of repelling the bad bacteria, and it's almost unheard of for unhealthy bacteria to get through into the milk. So if we consider for a moment all the hype we hear nowadays with healthy bacteria, we used to have a very highly probiotic diet that humans used to consume traditionally. So there was dairy products, fermented foods, all this, yet it's almost completely devoid in the modern diet. So cultured dairy products like yogurts, kefirs, etc. all proliferate these probiotics, which allow us to get healthier immune systems and gut flora. About 80% of our immune system in someone who's very healthy is going to be situated in the strength and integrity of the healthy bacterial flora, and also the flora throughout their whole body. So the number one bacteria in milk and dairy products, or at least one of the main ones, is acidophilus. It's a very aggressive bacteria, but aggressive on the good side. So it helps actually destroy and defend both the milk and dairy products and your body and your gut from pathogenic bacteria. And this is the key. So very healthy milk that has these beneficial bacterial components will actually destroy and get rid of the negative strains of E. coli, Listeria bacteria, Campylobacteria, and all these other really horrendous bacterial pathogens that in humans, if you have a very strong immune system, it's probably going to pass through. You might feel a little bit of something, but if you're sick, it can actually kill you. Like if you already have a lowered immune system, if you're a young child, if you're an old person with a compromised immune system, this can be fatal, if not very damaging to certain organs in the body. So if we also just talk for a second about E. coli, there's over 230 strains of E. coli, and only a fraction, 1% of those are pathogenic, and the other ones are all beneficial. So there's also a lot of fear around bacteria in our society. You just say E. coli and people immediately think this is a bad thing. However, these strains of E. coli we need to live create things in our gut like vitamin K2, vitamins B1, B2, B6, B12. And we can produce these in our own body, or it can be produced in the dairy product while it's fermenting, and we consume that and we get it. So that's something that we definitely need in our bodies to give us the nutrients that we need. So for some evidence of these things I just mentioned, Augenis Vonderplanitz, who's a proponent of raw food and specifically raw animal products, he's done research himself both on his wide variety of clients, maybe their patients. I'm not sure of his exact status as a health professional, but he also did studies at various universities, and one of them at University of California, Davis. He had them look at pasteurized milk and raw milk and spike each with 5 different strains of pathogenic bacteria and see what would occur. And basically within varying time frame, but basically within a week, the raw milk had completely wiped out, the bacteria in the milk had completely wiped out all the different strains of bacteria just by sitting there not doing anything, whereas the pasteurized dairy had completely gone bad. The bacteria proliferated because there was no good bacteria to fend them off, and also the lactic acid, I believe that was in the raw milk that was altered in the pasteurized milk, also played a part in preventing the proliferation of this bacteria. Whereas in the pasteurized milk, it was obviously did not have that, and so it went bad. The bacteria eat certain portions of the milk and release toxic wastes, which if consumed by a human would be very toxic. to the body and harmful to various organ tissues. A great study that you might want to check out if you really want some good information is the PARSIFAL study, PRSIFAL. I've got a link to it below, which would take you to the Wikipedia page. It just gives a description of it. Basically, it was looking at 5 groups of school children. I believe there was hundreds of children per group, so it was a very big study, and looking at various results that they got over time in terms of their health. But the emphasis was on a lot of sort of childhood things like allergies and various other things, which if you want to know more about, you can check out below. So one of the groups of these children went through the Waldorf system of schooling, which really emphasizes also on the food side of things. First of all, the avoidance of antipyretic drugs, antibiotic use, vaccinations, and then also included in the diet fermented vegetables, fermented dairy products, or rather fermented raw dairy products, and all these other health-promoting things that build up the immune system. And they've noticed a big difference in their number of allergies they had. And this is just common sense, but this is one of the big studies that if people need that as evidence, they can look to that and use that to help prove their point, which I highly recommend using if you need to be a health advocate in this arena and want to forward that fact that raw milk is the only milk we should be consuming and have been consuming for many tens of thousands of years. So the next thing that's critical for healthy dairy that you're going to be consuming, if you're choosing to consume it, is to not have dairy that's been homogenized. So homogenization is where they slam milk, or the whole milk product, but specifically the fat molecules in the milk, into a steel crusher, basically, and it slams it so hard that it fractures all the molecules into many, many different tiny pieces. So to start off, you have this fairly large fat molecule that's in the milk fat, and it's got certain properties to it that our body's used to consuming it in this way for many thousands of years. And when it's homogenized, which first I'll say is a process that's purely aesthetic, so it just makes milk and the cream in the milk stay mixed in, and it won't separate in the store so that you get ugly cream at the top of your milk. Whereas if you buy milk, you can simply just shake it if you're getting unhomogenized milk. So it is mixed in, and that's more to the liking of modern consumers that like processed foods, but the fat globule has been burst into many different tiny, tiny pieces, which is very hard on the body in the sense that the body can't recognize it, can't digest all these little pieces. Xanthine oxidase, which is normally on the outside of this fat globule, which helps the body identify it and digest it. It's an enzyme which helps break the uric acid that's formed through the digestion of this fat down. And you know, if you don't have that, or actually after homogenization it's been broken up into all these little components, and it's actually in the center of the broken up bits now, so it's not accessible by the body. These little bits actually go off and seep through the digestive system into the bloodstream, and get into the arterial walls of the circulatory system and cause inflammation, which in turn causes the buildup of plaque, cholesterol, and these things that lead to heart disease. So milk's connection with heart disease is pretty much exclusively, as we see it now, connected with this homogenization. There's other factors like grain-fed milk is going to have higher omega-6 content, which is going to be inflammatory or pro-inflammatory, which is going to contribute to heart disease as well. But it's not the actual cholesterol content that contributes to the heart and cardiovascular system problems that we see connected with dairy in many studies today. So as I was saying about the xanthine oxidase molecule, higher uric acid content and purines from this inability for your body to digest this because the xanthine oxidase has gone to the center of these molecules, basically will bring on the onset of other problems that are connected with high uric acid levels. So gout, I mean that's rare from just drinking milk, but basically a whole diet centered on animal products that are unhealthy is going to contribute to this. And you only have to do some search on high uric acid levels to see what it's connected to in terms of health problems. The other benefit that homogenization has for the milk industry And their marketing of their product is that they can add things back into the milk that were destroyed by pasteurization or altered. So vitamins A and D, which are not in such good condition after pasteurization, are added back in the forms of synthetic isolated vitamins, which are very hard on the body and not usable, as we know. Yes, they can reverse very severe things like rickets, which had vitamin D2 added to milk, but back in the day. But it's very hard on the system, like I said. Basically, most of it's being ejected by the immune system because it simply is not life-holding. Doesn't have the correct molecular spin on it, and the body has to get rid of it. And so this allows these things added back to milk to stay suspended throughout the milk and not separate out just like the fat would if it wasn't homogenized. Hey, we'll get back to the main topic of this video in just one moment. I wanted to let you know, however, that if you're really enjoying this video, or perhaps you're a regular subscriber, and you'd like to see me continue making regular postings on this channel, Secrets of Longevity, or perhaps even increase the frequency of these postings, of these well-researched videos, and even the articles on my site, I would really appreciate any contribution you're able to make to support me through any of the affiliate links listed below. There's a menu bar that you simply click and it pops down. If you're watching this on another platform other than YouTube, you can double-click this video and it'll take you to YouTube, where you can then click this bar that will pop down to give you these links. So like I mentioned, there's affiliate links. These are all companies I highly recommend and purchase for myself, and I get a percentage of anything that you purchase through these links, and that obviously would support me. And then there's also a link to a donation page on my site where you can make a PayPal donation, and you can also set up a phone consultation if that's something you're interested in doing. So with that, we're going to get back to the video, and thank you for any support you're able to give to me. So the next factor that needs to be in alignment with any dairy you're consuming if you want it to be as health-giving as possible is that it's grass-fed. Exclusively grass-fed is rare in terms of dairy, from my knowledge, but if you can get 80% or more of the cow's diet being grass, it's going to be much healthier than 99% of the milk that you would find in the grocery store, or actually 100% of the milk in the grocery store, but 99% of the milk that's available out in the world. If you have a goat, obviously have your goat be consuming, or a farmer's goat be consuming weeds and the various things that would be consuming, but again, you don't want the goat consuming grains such as corn, soy, and all these other things that they have never been designed to consume, just because it causes a lot of acidity in the body. These are animals that have multiple stomachs and they ruminate. They have a rumen, which is like a fermentation tank inside of their body that helps break down the cellulose, so it's not designed to digest grains. They can consume it and live on it for a certain number of years, but they have much shorter lifespan. They have very nutritionally deficient dairy products that come out of them, and because they're so unhealthy as animals, it allows the proliferation of bad bacteria, which I touched on before. So all these pathogenic strains of bacteria will make it through their system, or could even develop inside their system because they're so unhealthy, and end up in any products that are coming from them, whether it's the meat or their dairy. So some of the nutritional differences between grass-fed dairy products and grain-fed dairy products is obviously, first of all, if it's grain-fed, the majority of dairy, unless it's organic, in North America is now consuming, or made from animals consuming GMO grains, so it's wheat, corn. GMO corn is a big one, GMO soy is a big one, and we just simply do not know the effects of these in the long run, or we do basically have an idea of what these are doing. We know they're bad, but there's not enough evidence, obviously, to convince the mainstream, or at least there probably will never be enough evidence to convince the mainstream. But the public's getting the idea that these are not good things to be consuming, so we don't want to be consuming something that ate GMO products. But that aside, even if we're talking about organic dairy, grass-fed is where you want to go, not grain-fed, because number one is the conjugated linoleic acid, which is a great antioxidant that's going to be in animals that are eating the grass. It's an effect of certain components in the grass that end up in the dairy. This has cancer-fighting properties to it. It's got a number of other antioxidant properties, and it's all around very healthful compound that is higher in grass-fed animals, obviously. So that does not exist in grain-based meat or dairy from cows. Now, if we're talking about some of the other nutritional factors, there's also vitamins. D is going to be naturally in grass-fed milk, so grass is out there absorbing all the sun, so really lush green grass is going to have a certain amount of vitamin D2 in it. And a cow eats a lot of grass, so it's going to convert all this to vitamin D3, plus the cow's out there getting sun. So it converts to D3, and that's actually in the milk, fully available to the body, the human body. And humans have actually consumed a lot of and received a lot of their vitamin D historically through their nutrition, whether it's the livers of animals, the dairy of animals, the yolk of eggs, etc. So that's a great thing to have at their disposal. Now, there's also the vitamins A, K, and E that are going to be higher in grass-fed dairy. And we also have to consider the mineral content is going to be much better because grass is extremely mineral dense, whereas grains are very devoid of minerals because it's very much a starchy substance. Finally, another major nutritional component of grass-fed milk versus grain-fed milk is the levels of omega-3s versus omega-6. So omega-6, like I said, is the inflammatory fat. We need a certain amount of omega-6. It is an essential fatty acid, but in modern diets, people are getting many times more omega-6 in terms of the ratio to omega-3 than they need to be. So ideally it's anywhere between a 1-to-1 ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 to a 1-to-4 ratio. So the body needs a little bit more omega-6 than omega-3, but we're talking levels that are in the modern diet of being, if we have 1 part omega-3s to 50 parts omega-6, or 100 parts omega-6, or in some cases 200 parts omega-6. And that's just from the high grain consumption, high grain-fed dairy consumption, high grain-fed meat consumption, which is, when it's that out of whack, it's very inflammatory and very detrimental and increasing to things like heart disease and other diseases that are associated with that. So when we bring up the omega-3s, that's the anti-inflammatory compounds, and these can be converted to various essential fatty acids that our body makes itself, but needs the basic omega-3 to create these. And so actually in milk that's grass-fed, it's going to be reversed, higher omega-3 levels than omega-6, and this will help offset any high omega-6 levels we might get from anything else we're consuming that is omega-6 dominant. Next up is the bacterial proliferating effect, which I already hinted on, and the fact that grain-fed cows will create and proliferate this bacteria inside themselves, which ends up in the milk. But if you consider a cow walking around in grass, walking out in a pasture or meadow, it's a very clean environment, it's a very probiotic environment, lots of good bacteria on the ground, lots of sunshine, soil that's always composting itself. And when a cow leaves its excrement on the ground, it just creates more grass. It's fertilizer for the grass. So it's a very closed circuit. The cow's eating the grass and it provides fertilizer for the grass. Whereas on a cement slab, feedlot type scenario, confinement cows that are either never allowed on the grass or they're rarely allowed on the grass, or they spend a lot of time in these closed settings, they're walking through their own feces, they're getting it on themselves, they're getting it on their udders, and they're getting it into their mouths and into their digestive tract. So any bacteria that one cow has, it's going to be eventually within all the cows. Disease spreads very easily in feedlots where it's a lot less likely to spread when cows are, for the majority of the part, out in the pasture where they're designed to be and what they're eating, what they're designed to live on. So that actually goes into the humane aspect of it. Cows just love being in grass. It's just what they're designed to do. It's what they love to do. And when you consider their lifespan, it's also greater when they're on grass than compared to grain. But modern agriculture, factory farming, grain-fed cattle is such a money-pushing machine that because they can they have a higher turnover rate of cattle, they can afford to do this because they can actually pump out more milk in volume, but obviously it's way less in quality for the fact that they're consuming grain. So the actual milk production life of a grain-fed cow is about 2.5 years max, it takes them 2 years to get that, another 2.5 to 3 years producing milk, then they're off to slaughter because they stop producing a grass-fed cow. Again, it might take 2 years to get to the point of being able to produce milk, but then it can have up to 15 years of producing milk, and by the end of that, it's nearing the end of its life anyways, of a normal cow's lifespan. And in that case, what happens to it is dependent on the farmer and his values and what he's going to do, but there are farmers out there that won't kill their cattle and they'll let them die of old age and just be part of the herd. But obviously the more sort of streamlined farms that are much more business side oriented, if that's something that you want to look into, you could find one possibly that is not killing their cows when they reach that age and just lets them die of old age. Yet another component that we're going to discuss here, and this is a long video I know, but it's very important that you get all this information, you understand it all, and that you pass this along to friends and family. But it's that you want milk that's full fat. So there's a lot of fear in our society around fat. This is based on a lot of faulty research, which really started from Ansel Keys. If you just want to learn about that, just search Ansel Keys in any search engine and just learn about the bad science he proliferated. A-N-C-E-L, and his last name's Keys, K-E-Y-S, I believe. And he really promulgated this false research that societies that ate less fat lived longer, when he was very selective and actually omitted research from certain areas that consumed more fat and were doing fine. And there's also a big preponderance in our society of understanding fat as this one thing, when it's actually many, many times more complex than just one thing that is fat. There's many different types of fat. We need certain amounts of most of them in our diet to varying degrees. It's the same thing with cholesterol, which could be said as a component of this whole paradigm, that cholesterol is actually something we need and is healthy in our diet. It helps build certain parts of the body, like the brain, the myelin sheath, over the nerves, and is needed by various organs of the body. And yes, our body makes cholesterol. However, consumption of cholesterol isn't directly linked to the formation of heart disease. Like I said before, it's actually the inflammation in our arteries that causes our body to send out cholesterol to patch up these areas of the body. And another myth is actually that there's this good and bad cholesterol. That's known as HDL and LDL. What that HDL stands for is high density lipoprotein. So if you think of cholesterol as a fat, but we're talking about HDL and LDL, you have the word protein in there. So it's actually a proteinaceous structure that carries cholesterol. It's like a little cage that carries cholesterol out to certain parts of the body. HDL means, actually HDL is bringing cholesterol back to the liver to be processed, and in some cases eliminated from the body, in some cases reused. LDL is sending cholesterol out to the body, to certain parts of the body. So when you lower LDL cholesterol, you're lowering your liver's output of cholesterol into the tissues of the body. And cholesterol, like I was just about to say, is a band-aid type thing that is used. It's used as a band-aid, but it's also used to build structures. But when it's used as a band-aid, for instance, in our arteries, if we have inflammation, there's an inflammation in a blood vessel that's carrying blood to or from our tissues, it's going to coat that to try and push back the walls that are becoming inflamed and hazardous to closing up and causing a heart attack, causing a stroke, causing us to lose the qualities of whatever part of the body it's flowing to. So all the steroid hormones are also made from cholesterol, so a very low cholesterol diet or a very low fat diet will almost in all cases lead to low libido over time, low hormonal levels, and people, I routinely see it all the time, have to add these things back in to certain amounts of animal products to rebuild these hormones in the body and to be healthy long term. And that's obviously going to vary from individual to individual. However, we just simply do not see long-term studies on vegans that completely omit all forms of animal products. So cholesterol is not something to be feared. There's lots of information out there on the cholesterol myth. You can just search that term, cholesterol myth, and you'll get some information on that if you want to learn more. And you can also do the same for saturated fat. That's, again, something that's in animal products, but is not something to be feared. The body makes saturated fat, but we also need it, and it's easier for our body to use saturated fat that we get from the foods we eat. Now, the reason we don't want to separate the fat from milk, and obviously we don't want to do homogenization, we already learned about that, but the fat is where we have all the vitamins and minerals or the majority of them, contained in that portion. So vitamins A, D, E, and K are fat soluble and stay in the fat. These are very deficient in modern culture because we have such widespread skimming of milk, consumption of low-fat milk, and everything in society now is low-fat. They cut off the fat from meat if you're one that's consuming meat. And these vitamins are very key for building bone health. So when you consider actually the studies that are linking milk consumption with osteoporosis in modern culture, which does exist, and those studies are correct. However, they're looking at consumption of low-fat, generally milk. It's not whole milk, it's probably 2% or 1% that people are mostly consuming, and it's also been homogenized, and it's been pasteurized. Had all these processes to it that I'm talking about, and remember pasteurization causes the loss of phosphatase, which is needed to absorb the phosphate and other minerals into the bones. So when that's missing, when the fat-soluble vitamins which build bone health are missing, you start to get the picture that milk might not be something that builds bone health if it's had all these things altered to it. So these studies are correct, and also modern areas of the world aren't that physically active. So much more sedentary industrialist nations, when you consider places like India, yes, they consume a lot of dairy there, but also other places where they might not be consuming that much dairy, but they're very active. When you're putting stress on your bones through physical labor or exercise, weight-bearing exercise, following Wolff's Law, which is really the prime thing you need to consider if you're at risk of osteoporosis or you have osteoporosis, is that you need to put stress on the bones through weight-bearing exercise to trigger the body to start to put minerals into them. So you can throw sawdust on a table. I like to use that analogy. If you've got a table with all these holes and bumps and grinds into it, you can throw sawdust on the table, but it'll just fall off or it won't do anything. But if you use the glue to fill in the gaps with this sawdust mixture that you could create, you're going to be able to repair your table and rebuild it. And so that's what fat-soluble vitamins, that's what these minerals and enzymes and basically the whole package in milk as a whole food in its raw, unpastured state is going to provide you in combination with an active lifestyle. The next crucial element, which I'm sure is a no-brainer for most of you, is that you need to consume dairy products that are organic. I'm not going to go too in-depth into this because all the information is out there on organic food. It is crucial that everything you'll be consuming is organic nowadays. And if it's not certified organic, you're getting it from a farmer that you know is doing organic practices, so it's what we could call traditional organic, and that's going to be good in terms of not taking in these synthetic pesticides, herbicides, larvicide, fungicide, and fertilizers. And also in the case of animals, you're going to be getting RBGH in the case of cows in the US, not in other places in the world mostly. That's recombinant bovine growth hormone, which is very detrimental on the animal itself and ends up in the milk, ends up in the people. There's other hormones used in some cases. There's the pesticides and herbicides used on the food that the animal's consuming. There's the antibiotics the animal's consuming, which further allows bad bacteria to get into the animal and to end up in the milk. And another point on that bacterial thing is that when milk's been pasteurized, you actually don't eliminate the bacteria, you've killed it, but it's still floating in there, which your body has to then get rid of. So it's getting rid of good bacteria and bad bacteria that exist in the milk that has been pasteurized, which is a really disgusting thought, and it's still a burden to your immune system. And part of what causes the mucus reaction in a lot of people is just your body's immune system just becoming overwhelmed by all this dead matter that's in the milk that your body has to get rid of. And of course, I already touched on it, but GMOs, genetically modified organisms, we do not want that in the feed our animals consuming, our cows and goats, etc. So we don't want the grains that are genetically modified, we don't want the cows to be genetically modified, which I'm sure is coming. And that's just part of the whole organic standard. On top of that, the next thing would be, this is a little more, getting more advanced, but we want to avoid hybridized cows. So there's one main hybridized species which makes up 95% of all the milk consumed commercially. It could be even more than that, it might be closer to 98%. So that's Holstein variety cows. So that picturesque image of a cow that has mostly white body with big black splotches all over it is the Holstein cow. I believe it was bred to be that way in Holland, but basically that's a very deranged animal in terms of the milk it produces. It produces an A1 type casein molecule in its milk. I believe it produces both A1 and A2. There's some cows that produce just A1, there's some cows that produce just A2. There might be one or two other breeds of cow that produce A1. But any milk that has A1 casein is unhealthy and very foreign to all animals' bodies because it's never been produced in nature. The exact qualities of the proteinaceous structure of casein can't get into too much depth, but casein as a whole is a complex molecule, very slow to digest, but A2 casein, which is naturally found in human breast milk, goat milk, every other milk of every other animal on the planet, as well as the less hybridized forms of cows, it's much more digestible and is not associated with a lot of the problems and disease factors that A1 casein has been found to have been connected with. So there's studies from Australia that look into this. I've got a link below that you can learn more about this. And this is very crucial because a lot of people are very hyped about the China study, which is a very fraudulent study that's basically used as a blanket statement when anyone wants to talk about dairy, just say, oh, well, the China study says it's wrong. So, that's my argument, is just say China study, and that's their point. People seem to think now that that's an entire argument. You just have to say those two words, and that seems to be their only response. However, when we start to analyze it, we see a lot of problems with the China study, and number one thing is that they were using A1 casein on these rats in this massive study as opposed to A2 casein. So we already know from the study, and the ongoing studies around the world, but the study from Australia, that A2 casein is the one that is very harmless in terms of not contributing to diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and upping the risk for all these things in humans and whatever animals they've done the studies on. So that's something very crucial to consider. And before I go more onto the topic of China study, I'll actually address that more in the response to the vegan argument portion of this video, coming up at the end. However, the idea that A2 casein is the ideal dairy casein we want to be consuming is that some types of animals produce a lot less casein, so if that's a concern for you, you could go for goat milk, which is lower in casein than cow's milk, specifically cows that are producing this A2 casein. And again, sheep milk, horse milk, yak milk probably is low in it too. Maybe it's higher in it, I don't know. And if you're going for dairy cow milk, look for Jersey cow milk, Guernsey cow milk, and any of these other heritage breeds that you could call almost like an heirloom variety of cattle that have been around for longer than the Holstein, which is much more mutated. And actually the A1 casein is literally a natural mutation that nature did cause, obviously, but it's through human intervention. So with all that being said about dairy, I just want to sum it up here, is that you want to have your dairy be organic. You want to have it being grass-fed. You want it to have it being non-hybridized as possible. So from Guernsey, Jersey cow, any other variety that's an heirloom variety that's producing A2 casein. You want it to be raw. You don't want it to be pasteurized, obviously. You want it to not be homogenized. And of course you want it to be full fat. So we don't want skim milk, we don't want any of these other byproducts that can be made from milk, like powdered milk. You want it to be a whole food. Now, again, fermented foods like the cheese, the kefir, the yogurt, clabber, etc. are great, and they're still considered whole foods. And by the way, whey powder, if it's a non-isolated whey, is technically a whole food too, because that's what's separated from the cheese naturally through curdling. It's very harmless. They've just dried out a whey powder, which is still very healthy if you can get one that is grass-fed, that is not heat-treated, and still has all those immune-building qualities, such as the immunoglobulins, or globulins, I think is the proper term, but it sounds better as goblins, I think. And these are the factors that have many health benefits, such as increasing your liver's ability to produce glutathione, a very powerful anti-aging antioxidant that some people are taking as isolated nutrients when you can simply boost it by taking a good quality raw milk or raw whey powder. or even colostrum for that matter. And if you want to find a great raw colostrum product, I highly recommend checking the link below. This is a raw powdered colostrum. Basically no colostrum on the market that is as widely available as this one, that is not altered in the sense of having the fat taken out or certain things put into it, etc. It's just simply been dehydrated as a powder, very fresh, and I've got a link below also to an article on colostrum if you want to learn more about that, because I'm not going to get into detail on that in this video, but it's an immune boosting, growth factor enhancing, anti-aging superfood, which is sort of the first milk that comes from a cow when they've just given birth. Actually, any mammal produces colostrum. It's a very beneficial food, and no, it is not taken away from the calf, because the calf would obviously die if it didn't get the colostrum it needs, because that's unique to the cow, is that the calf needs its fill of colostrum before any is taken, but it produces an abundance of colostrum. So the excess is then collected and used in this way for humans to boost their immune system, to have this anti-aging effect, and to generally promote good health. So you can learn more about that below, and you can also grab it at that link as well. So the main vegan concerns that I'm going to address in this next portion, which won't be as long as the first, don't worry about that, is, I already touched on it. The first thing I was going to talk about was the idea that we are not designed to consume milk after weaning. However, I have already thoroughly described the process of lactase persistence that has occurred in our species, and personally I think it is a great alternative, especially if you're vegetarian. I'm not of the opinion that vegetarians are unhealthy, as some people that are involved with raw milk promote that idea. Specifically the Weston A. Price community does say things like that, but we do see a lot of vegetarian cultures that are doing great. Specifically out in California, there's the Loma Lindens, which is probably the greatest hub of longevity in North America, and they're consuming a vegetarian diet, and within that community there is the omnivores that are consuming meat to varying degrees who have lower lifespan. There's been a lot of study on this group, and it's very interesting to see that the vegetarians are living longer. I'm not saying do one or do the other, but if you are vegetarian or even vegan, you want to decide to incorporate some animal products back into your diet, raw milk is definitely the way to go, and specifically cultured raw dairy products, because those are the ones that have been used for many, many millennia and have all the health benefits associated with both fermented foods, raw dairy, and are basically delicious as well, and very easily added to anyone's lifestyle and dietary regimen. So on the topic of whether we're designed to consume this or not, I think it's great if you are on the side of ethics that you consume dairy and even eggs to some extent instead of meat, because you're not having to kill an animal. In India, that's the whole premise behind consumption of dairy, is that it saves you the karmic burden of consuming dead flesh. And there is a certain amount of idea behind that, that you're promulgating death. You're taking that energy into the body. Whether you believe in karma or not, or any belief system, is up to you. However, we do know that the auric field, as per Kirlian photography, shows that meat has a black aura when cooked, it has a brown aura when raw. So it can be a bit hard for some people to consume, especially if they're on a spiritual path, and dairy is a great alternative that's much more living. As we know, especially when it's been cultured, it's definitely living, because it's got the enzymes, the bacteria that's grown in that, and it's very life-giving and health-promoting. It can even be used externally, specifically yogurt on the face for a rejuvenating effect. Colostrum can be used for that way as well. If you're mixing the powder with water, or you're getting fresh colostrum from a farmer, you know. You can use that externally, you can use it internally. It has an all-around rejuvenating effect. And if you're on the side of vegetarian or veganism and you're moving towards consuming dairy, that is definitely something I highly recommend, is considering dairy products and consuming them in a liberal quantity without the fear of heart disease and all these other things often attached to it, which simply doesn't have any true foundation in actual science, as opposed to the political science of these large-scale, in some cases large-scale studies, in some cases smaller studies, but just the whole paradigm that animal cholesterol is the worst thing that you can be consuming. So the idea that we shouldn't be consuming dairy after weaning is simply an observational thing. It's not that statement is never made with much thought in regards to where we've come from and what we're trying to accomplish. It is obviously up to an individual person's choice whether they consume dairy or not. We know from the health promoting effects that it is health promoting. So just because it's unnatural in the sense that humans in the wild can't do this, humans in the wild also can't eat bananas, which are extremely hybridized. They've only been around in terms of their seedless variety that are very sweet for the last 100 years or less. And other varieties go further back that were sweet, but further back you get their starchier and starchier until just a few hundred years ago they were always cooked when they were consumed. And same with many other fruits, same with many other things in the raw food and vegan community. These things were not around even in the wild, even over 1,500 years ago, or 15,000 years ago rather. 10,000 years ago is when agriculture really took off in the sense that it was very widespread, and people were able to develop grains and these things. So if we're making the argument that humans shouldn't be consuming milk because it's not done in the wild, it's past weaning stages in mammals, it's not done in wild humans, well, in that case we shouldn't be consuming these other foods that don't exist in the wild or didn't exist prior to agriculture. And the interesting thing is that dairy was the first thing that came about and perhaps brought humans into becoming more cultured. And we think of a culture, the word culture is related to a cultured food, and dairy was definitely the first cultured food. And herding, like I said, started 30,000 years ago, and that was probably 2 times further back in history than when agriculture really took off in terms of farming plant foods. So to me that argument doesn't stand ground because of this, and that if you're making that argument then you should be consuming an all vegan wild food diet, which I've never heard of anyone doing. So my stance on food is obviously health-based, so I'm more interested in that aspect to it than the ethical or the philosophical. So I think that argument falls into the philosophical, just because it's, it's just something that some people throw out there just because they want to prove their point. But as we know from the points I've mentioned, I think the points of health and how long we've been consuming it for really wipe out and overstep this point to the point of making dairy seem like a very good candidate for a staple in our diet. I began to touch on the China study and started to talk about casein and other factors involved with the China study. It's a very vast topic to get into. A lot of people are anti-dairy because of it now, from what I've seen online and also in person through various dietary communities. We have to also consider that we should actually look at this in depth before we develop these opinions, not just get caught up in the hoopla of everyone's promoting this thing as being the be-all end-all of diet. So let's actually consider it and look into it a little more in depth and not just go with the herd mentality. So the China study was a very long study and very in-depth and has some good results. However, we have to first right off the bat understand that it's correlative. So it's not a direct study that was done like we take someone and we give them a placebo, we give them this other group or one person this other thing and see the effect. So it's not a double-blind study, it's not a study in the sense of examining one single thing and getting a result from it. So correlative is like you get a bunch of data from studying massive amounts of people. This is an epidemiological study, and the problem with those is that you get into correlation, which is the study's head leader or board of leaders or whoever's involved in interpreting the data. It's based on their interpretation, and obviously these aren't facts because it's not double-blind. So we've got these two factors: who's interpreting and the fact that it can't indicate for absolute certainty what's going on because it's not, like I said, a double-blind study. So T. Colin Campbell's work with the China study is very different from the original study, which is, forget the exact name, but you can check out a link below to get that name. It involves something dietary research in China, massive volume that very few people have actually looked at. There's someone who made perhaps the best response on the net that I've seen to that work by using that study and basically used their own interpretation of it to disregard Dr. Colin Campbell's work, and kind of showed him up, because he did respond, because it was such a good response, even though this person doesn't have a bunch of letters attached to the end of their name. And you can check that out. There's two versions. There's a shortened version, just to get the gist of it. Even that one was pretty long, but the very long one's like 10,000 words. It's a very long essay, basically. And it's a very long study, so it's worth it if this is something you're very passionate about. And yeah, Colin Campbell actually responded once. He responded again, but then he wasn't seen or heard of again. There was so much backlash against what he said, because it was just so poorly put together in terms of his response. There was nothing for him to go on. He made a fool of himself, and it just is a very glaring example that this guy, or at least this work, isn't really all that based in reality. So those who dismiss stuff like this, blog posts, oh, this person doesn't have credentials, this person doesn't have an understanding, they're just some blogger, that's really undermining the fact that information is information. It doesn't matter whose mouth it comes from. If we're dealing with facts, we're dealing with facts, not the people who gave those facts. So that's sort of the academic snobbery that can come into people's opinions, whether they're academics or not. So we always have to approach things from actually looking at what's there and interpreting that, instead of the person writing it, instead of the format it's in, instead of their language, although obviously it's really poorly written, no one's going to be able to read it. But this is a very well-written blog post, and it's has a lot of hits, and it is generating a lot of buzz. So if this is something you're passionate about and really want to understand, I highly recommend reading this and reading the China study and seeing for yourself what you think of the two. I'll generally give my basic breakdown of why I think the China study isn't valuable information. So I already mentioned that casein that was studied on rats is not the A2 casein, which is healthy. They used the A1 casein, which we know is already connected to these things that they said it was connected to. So it's supposedly this big thing that turns on cancer. However, that's already understood from the studies on A2 versus A1 casein in connection with A1 casein. So we shouldn't be just applying that knowledge to blanket statement all dairy, because A2 casein behaves much differently in the body than A1 casein. And we also have to consider the study was done on rats, which need an extra amino acid they have essential compared to humans. They have a number of digestive processes that are different from humans. While they do have some similarities in their overall biology, digestion is a major one that's different, and we can't take absolute results from rats and directly apply it to humans in that way. And like I already said about the casein, or the nutrients they're using, is these were isolated casein molecules or compounds, which is very foreign to the body. You'd never encounter that unless you're a bodybuilder consuming casein protein, which I highly recommend not doing. That's a very fractionated food. But if you're consuming whole food milk, you're going to have the whey component in there, which has anti-cancer properties. So if casein, even A2 casein, has a slight preponderance to creating cancer in the body, whey powder, or rather the whey in milk, has a reversal effect on all of that. And nature is very smart this way. It has a lot of foods that, when you isolate something out of it, that's a toxic compound, but in its whole food, it is perfectly healthy, and there's certain things that counteract each other, and foods are built in to have these qualities in them. There's certain people in the community of veganism or raw foodism that promote fruits as being a healthy food, or rather hybridized high sugar fruits. And if we consider a lot of the research on fructose, which is an isolated compound, which is very detrimental in isolation, it's very different, or at least the results are going to be very different from fruit consumed, which has fructose in it, which on its own could be very detrimental, but it also has glucose, the fiber, the minerals, the vitamins, everything else wrapped into it, that really change the effect of the fructose on the body. It slows the absorption, it can offset some of the negative effects of fructose, and so you can't simply take a study on an isolated nutrient and say this applies as a blanket statement to the whole food. So that's the major problem, is the two ones, the casein and the fact that it's an isolated compound as opposed to a whole food, and that it's having this effect in the body. And what I think is really strange that Colin Campbell is such a proponent of whole foods, if you read the China study, which I have several times, something that I haven't believed in until I really did some in-depth research on this. He is a believer of whole foods, yet does this study using isolated nutrients. It just does not make sense in my understanding of what you should do if you're really wanting some good hard science that's going to give you good reality-based results. And of course, all the other factors I discussed at the prior parts in this video, the fact that it's not organic, the fact that it's not raw, the fact that it's not grass-fed, all these factors are going to affect the isolated casein that was used in the study. And as we know, this isn't going to be raw, grass-fed, non-hybridized casein. It's from a very conventional source, and it's very much going to cause the rats to be unhealthy and develop the cancerous tumors as it did. So from the study, yes, we can say casein isolated from hybridized cows, from non-organic, non-raw, homogenized, etc. Sources is going to cause these effects. So yes, we can say that's what people are getting when they consume mainstream dairy products, mainstream dairy product isolates. And we can just simply say, let's stay away from that. Most of us in the health community already don't touch that stuff. And we're very smart for doing that. And that's all the China study has shown us. The other part of the China study is largely on the human populations in China, which was the correlative part. Actually, the rat part of the study would have been double-blind, but if we're talking about the majority of the study and why it's called the China study, it's the fact that they were looking at the Chinese in certain villages throughout the country, and there's a number of problems there as well. First of all, somehow Dr. Colin Campbell comes to the conclusion that veganism is the ideal diet for humans, when not a single village or city they looked at was vegan. There were a lot of vegetarian areas and pockets. Never was there any place what was 100% vegan. I believe the lowest point was like 7 grams of protein was what they were consuming, which is, I guess, the equivalent to an egg a day. So if you're eating an all plant-based diet and eating 1 egg a day, that could be the difference between, you know, major deficiencies in the long run of certain fat-soluble vitamins, certain, in some cases, protein, certain minerals. And that's really key for long-term health, as we know it from a lot of the research on the benefits of animal products. So it's a bit of a long stretch of him to make that statement, and also to make those statements from rats to humans. So we see sort of this correlative, again there's that word, approach to science which is not accepted by mainstream science. It shouldn't be accepted by the public, and it shouldn't be accepted by those in the health community. But unfortunately the study really has, to such a strong degree. Finally, just about the China study again, is that there's a large amount of assumption around the way they interpret animal product consumption. So areas that had the highest animal product consumption were inner cities, or basically cities in China, which are developing, but they have a ton of Western influence already. So this is areas where they're consuming a lot of junk food, yet they don't control for that in these massive studies on these areas, and when they're collecting the data. So there's junk food consumption mixed in with calling that meat consumption, animal product consumption, yet it's like McDonald's and really low grade animal products, consumption of grain-fed animal products, and seeing that as, like I already mentioned, high omega-6 leads to heart disease, etc. These things are going to be causing the correlation between these results of higher disease rates in those areas and the consumption of these foods. So when that's extrapolated and said all animal products cause this, when it's specifically junk food and all these other things that are mixed in, yeah, it becomes a bit difficult to get and actually believe the results that Colin Campbell claims he got from his study. So check out that link below for that blog post. It's really a good read if you're up for it. And don't just simply dismiss it, as some people do, just because it's written on a blog by someone who obviously is very knowledgeable, but doesn't have a doctor or a PhD at the end of their name. Finally, one of the main points that vegans come to me with is the ethical issue of dairy products. I'm not going to speak on the ethical issue of meat consumption because that obviously entails the slaughter of the animal. We do know that slaughterhouses are horrible places, specifically even more so in factory farms. And there is more humane slaughter, but how can you call slaughter humane? I understand the points on that. However, when it comes to dairy products, there's a number of things I do have to say because I continually get this on a lot of my videos and other sources, articles, etc. People complaining that there's no question that dairy is abusing the animals. I personally tend to think of dairy farming as a symbiotic relationship, ideally, when you have a really conscious farmer, and to a certain extent, the farmer's always going to have profit on his mind. However, some don't push it to such a degree where they're abusing the animals that you see in these sort of extreme PETA ads, or PETA, however you pronounce, P-E-T-A. This organization really sort of blanket statements all animal product farming as being horrendous in this really animal cruelty type way, when that's not the case with smaller scale farming, with more ethical farming and more conscious farmers. If you consider a pet, technically that could be animal abuse if you're abusive to the animal, but a lot of people take very good care of their pets, and they're actually using that pet to get some sort of emotional satisfaction. Yes, there's an emotional bond, but there's still, people get a pet for a specific need, and there's a symbiotic relationship. You take care of the pet, it gives you love and affection. You give it love and affection, it returns it. So the same thing on a farm. Yes, you can develop that emotional attachment with your animals if you, or I shouldn't say just attachment, but bond with the animals, and a lot of farmers do that, and that's wonderful. But you're also needing to take care of them, and in exchange, they're going to provide you with product that you can consume or sell. And that's not a horrendous thing to be doing. These are, in the case of cows, they're very hybridized, they can't exist in the wild, so it's a symbiotic relationship in the sense that their survival is depending on humans to take care of them, and there's not going to be many people interested in taking care of cows that feeding them and housing them and providing them with warmth in the form of electricity, etc. during the winter time without any monetary return. And I certainly don't think people are interested in seeing cows go extinct. So keeping cows in a healthy condition, anyone who's worked on a farm, I've worked on a farm, but anyone who has will know that specifically it was a very conscious farm, that the animals enjoy each other's company, they enjoy life, they're not miserable, they're not sort of this personified image of like a suffering that a lot of vegans unfortunately have, which in my view is partly connected to the deficiencies they have of these nervous system and brain building components that are found in animal products. But yes, the bond that exists between farmer and animal and between all the animals makes it a very healthy relationship on a farm. Obviously when it comes to slaughtering an animal, there's no question there the animal's dying, and that's not ever going to be the animal's choice. But however, if a cow actually had a voice, I'm sure it wouldn't object to being in the position it's into when it's very consciously done. They obviously, when their udders are full, they actually get pleasure from being milked. The fact that it's a machine these days as opposed to someone's hand isn't that big of a deal for them. I mean, like I said, worked on a farm. I actually worked on one for a month, an organic farm in my area. This was way back in high school. There can be a very conscious relationship, and that's something that I think people really need to consider, and if they want to have an opinion on, they should go out and do themselves before belligerently telling people not to do this for those specific reasons that they have idealized in their minds. I already touched on it in terms of the health quality of the animal products, but you know, the idea that milk causes mucus formation is untrue when it's raw and fits all those qualities I mentioned. That's all factors concerning poor lactose digestion, high somatic cell count in pasteurized dairy, and all these other factors that basically creates muck in our body that our body has to get rid of. But when milk is digestible and raw and meets all these qualities, it's not going to do these things. In fact, it can even reverse asthma. It can help reverse a lot of the problems that people experience from mainstream commercial dairy. Even when it comes to Crohn's disease and other gut issues, the healthy bacteria is very beneficial, can reverse a lot of these things that are associated with dairy, specifically diseases that are pretty much said offhand that, yes, these are connected with dairy. Even the medical establishment recognizes that. So to sum it all up, I hope you can definitely consider consuming raw animal products, specifically raw dairy. We know that we have a 35 million year history as a species. This goes back even to before we were humans consuming a large amount of animal products in our diet. Back then it was meat, but we have these needs for cholesterol, saturated fat, and other things. So that I'm going to strongly consider that you try some truly raw, truly health-promoting dairy products that meet all the standards I've talked about in this video, and decide for yourself whether it works for you or not. There's still, even despite that, there are some people, some very few people that raw dairy products won't work for, and that's fine. There's never one food that works for everyone, of course. Another great food, which I've already mentioned, is the colostrum. Haven't gone into detail about that in this video, but I'm posting a link right here, which you can check out if you want to learn more about that in a video I've made. That's a two-part video. I also got a link below, like I said, to an article on colostrum. You can check out a link also to where you can purchase some colostrum powder. Fresh colostrum is great, but the colostrum powder is from a very wide range of different cows and different farms. So what this allows is a wider exposure to various strains of bacteria and other things that the cows encounter in their environment and in their farms that they live on, so that they develop better immunity to these things, and that's available in the colostrum because it's such an immune-building food, and so has such a vast array of immune-building components. So very high-quality product, so check that out if you want to learn more. And with that, I'm going to say take care and embrace life without limits.